Does anybody have anything from yesterday that you want to make sure we cover something? You have any questions that came up in conversations afterwards? Anything like that? We're going to continue some of that conversation today, but there's a couple of topics we want to go through first. So I was going to start this morning with a discussion about a project that's going on the DOI side that has relevance for us. And so if there's not any other stuff, I will go ahead. Okay, so on the DOI side, they have a new program project. It's definitely a project right now, probably going to be a program called Data Identification and Semantic Categorization. So that's a really big name, and we're going to unpack that a little bit. But there's a lot of ties to this community in this effort. So the biggest being that Irwin was selected as one of 4 pilot projects for this effort in the Department of Interior. And they're using Edge to collect all of the information and do the data inventory for all of the offices and bureaus in DOI. So so we have a lot of relationship with it, and so I want you guys to have some awareness of it and some of the opportunities that come with it for us. So DISC is really about supporting 4 main goals. The first is strategic fact-based decision-making. So this goes back to the evidence-based policy-making or evidence-based decision-making act, right, of 2018. And in that act, it requires that the secretaries of departments in the federal government establish data inventories for all of the data in their systems. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Zero trust is a component. Risk management, because what they're focusing on and why I think they might have a good chance of being successful is they're focusing on sensitive data. So they're only inventorying sensitive data and CUI. So not trying to do everything. And then the benefit of a data inventory, which is has this ability to make it easier to find data and reduce the burden in searching for and using data. So I just pulled some of the slides that they've used. They have done a couple of briefings to the DOI Data Governance Board. And then with the Irwin team, we've had a couple of other sessions with them. And so I just kind of pulled some slides from different presentations rather than building some new things. So there might be a little bit of redundancy, but so again, the sensitive data classification, and what they're looking to establish is a common approach for identifying this. And I think that's really important because at the department level, the secretary is held accountable for this work in relationship to the 2018 policies. So being able to roll it up at the department level, they have the same issue at the department level that we do working across all the agency boundaries, right? So it's there's opportunities for us to learn from them that way and to share information. Defining labels and categorization mechanisms. And so again, kind of a standardization, right? How do you standardize so that you can share this information and make it usable? The other impact that has on us is that there's always a risk, right, when you're kind of one of the leaders in new technology. And so we have had Edge for 3 years now and going on 4 years. And we were the first ones to be using it, right? So we kind of went in and built things the way we wanted to. And we tried to be mindful of the fact that we would have to be working in the department because we knew that was where Todd wanted to go with it. But as they've been going through this process, one of the things they did was realize that in order to be able to develop queries across different offices and bureaus, is that they had to have a naming convention for the namespaces. And so then they came to us and said, so can you change all your namespaces? And so Gabriella was able to go in and get that done, but then that meant that we had to, like, some of the connections that we'd already had made, we had to go in and make sure those were working, and so we've had to do some cleanup on that. We're hoping that's the only impact on the departmental standardization process for what we've done in Wildland Fire, but we'll see. We'll work with them, and as we get more connections to Edge, then we're going to be less willing to make those types of changes. Again, DISC is intended to support the data pillar of the zero trust policy as well. And so this is, again, where we've got this tie. And I think it's kind of interesting because what's happening in DOI in particular is that there's this movement where the CDO is under the OCIO, but there's a recognition that they really need to think about the data and the technology separately. And so they are, we've seen a couple of joint memos come from the CDO and CIO. And so we'll be curious to kind of see how that evolves. We have a new Associate Chief Data Officer for the Office of the Secretary, which is what the Office of Wildland Fire falls under. And he actually works for the Chief Financial Officer, not for IT. And so it's on the data governance board for DOI, about half of the bureaus and offices, their chief data officers don't work for IT. They work for the business in some capacity, in some sort of alignment. So kind of interesting to watch and see how that goes. But this is definitely viewed as a partnership between the CIO and CDO at the department level. So data identification is, because that's really what this is focused on, but the output of this effort is going to be a data inventory. And, there's a lot of value to a data inventory, and it's not just a list of data elements, right? There are a lot of attributes that we collect along with that, including location, format, ownership. There's all of that stuff that we collect in Edge, and we want to build in Edge, right? And have all these relationships and links. And the data inventory is going to be really important as we start building out IDME capacity, because if we have a data marketplace and we expect a user to be able to go in and type in, I want to look for data that gives me, the number of fuels treatments in this district at this time, and, that were done on a Thursday, right? Like, we want to have a natural language model that sits on top of that people can actually type in a question like that, and it can go find stuff, and a data inventory is going to be an important part of that. Semantic is another really important part of that, and the reason that Todd has semantic in the title of this project is because he understands the relevance, and he is working to promote that within the department. And it's one of the things that when we first started working with a graph database, so some of you may remember several years ago when we were playing around with Neo4j as a property graph, it was great. Like, it's really cool and it's fun and flexible and has some really cool visualizations. And Todd at that time was really encouraging us to look at RDF graph, and it just was like a step too far for us at that point. There was a lot of just the way that graphs work is like it changed. It tweaked my brain for like 18 months to like actually be able to go from a table format, thinking in the spreadsheet to thinking in a mind map. It was just a transitionary process. But the thing we came to is we realized that the property graph is great as long as we were working within our boundary. But as soon as we wanted to step outside of that and share anything, whether it's the data or the schema, the model, any of that type of stuff, it kind of fell apart because it's not standardized. And so RDF is standardized, has international standards. It's about, it's the World Wide Web too, right? Comes out of that work to be able to make data more interoperable and shareable. And so semantics is what RDF brings and really enables, because in this example, so my good friend GPT chat helped me out with this one. So the thing that semantics does is when we bring in a data element, so we bring in the concept of Apple, right? We have all of these other things that we know about it and this is where in IDME, when we talk about data coming into the raw zone and then us enriching it, that semantic enrichment is part of what that does. And so then you suddenly have access to way more information just by one concept. And it gives you lots of other ways to slice and dice things, combine and do analysis from that additional meaning that we have built into the semantics. The other thing about semantics in the RDF world in particular is that it is written to be machine understandable. So everything that we have in Edge right now, we could run through AI really easily because it is built to do that. And the machines can understand it. So it helps us, it advances us in being able to use some of these new tools and capabilities. So the semantic concept of DISC is a key. And then categorization, like we get that, right? Like we've been doing categorization since we were in preschool, and it's how our brains work, that we always want to find a hook to hang something on so that we understand how it fits with something else. And but categorization again is a way to help us sort and filter and find things from a particular lens or view. I think it's important to know that we can categorize data a variety of ways. And again, that's why Edge helps us, because it's more than just tagging. It creates those relationships, and a single concept can have multiple relationships and multiple views. So that's kind of the DISC, the parts and pieces of this. Where they have a phased approach to this. And so what they did, which I thought was great, is they started with leadership. And so Todd DeBolt went and talked to Jeff Rupert, who is the director at OWF, and said, hey, you know, this is what we've got going on. We're looking for leadership engagement and support. And they continue to have those conversations at the executive level, which is helpful for us, right? So in this kind of phased approach, I think we are probably at that bureau system kickoff phase. We've done some of the initial information gathering and the stakeholder awareness, but I'm going to talk about the information gathering and the kickoff, and then just so you kind of have a better sense of what that includes, at least as far as we understand. So what they did was come to us and said, okay, here's out on the SharePoint site, here's a spreadsheet, and this is the information that we want about Irwin. And so I sent it to Gabriella and said, what do you think? And she's like, yeah, I think we got all of that. And so we scheduled a call with the Irwin team, and Gabriella had gone through and filled out the spreadsheet. I think there was one diagram that we wanted to include, the database schema that Kara had. And so we just validated that with the Irwin team, attached that schema and hit submit, and it took a half an hour. So the value, I think, in that for us is that we get all these data calls all the time. And if we're mindful about what we're collecting, we don't need to collect 150 attributes about every application, but there's probably, 15 or 20 things that we get hit up about or that can help us understand what we have. And that if we have that in a centralized place, we can answer these data calls more quickly. And I think we were able to demonstrate that with that little effort with Irwin. Now there's more information that we'll be getting, that they'll be needing, that we may not have, but felt pretty good about it. So that I think was a win. The stakeholder kickoff and discovery activities. So I think it's important to see who they have listed as stakeholders. So in addition to the system and the data stakeholders, the ACDO and ACIO partnership, they're also bringing in DOI and privacy and CISO, right, records management. So this is a pretty holistic approach. They're not doing this in a vacuum. And again, that's one of the reasons I'm optimistic that they can be somewhat successful in this and move us down the path with that. The sensitive data and CUI guidelines and practices. So we gave them this system information that was pretty straightforward, but we don't really have, like on an interagency basis, like any specific sensitive data guidance or policy. I think we all kind of follow whoever the managing partner's guidance is. But we did talk about, I think the closest thing that we have is back in, I think it was 2016-ish. Ben Butler had a task group under the data management committee that looked at the data that was in Irwin and looking to see like what should be available openly and what is considered more sensitive. And in that analysis, that group came back and said, we really think that we shouldn't put out injuries and fatalities and that kind of stuff in the open real-time data. And so we talked to them about this idea of that being kind of slow data, that eventually it's available, but we kind of want to not have it out first thing. So they're like, that's, not the first time they've heard that type of scenario. So we're going to work through some of that, looking at how we document and define and describe that. And then the other thing I talked to them about was frequencies, because we have this kind of urban legend that frequencies are sensitive, and you've got people on one end that are like, no, it's definitely should be CUI and we have to protect it like crazy. And you've got other people that anybody that has a scanner can pick up the frequency. So how sensitive is it, right? Like, so we have this really big spectrum, and so Tony is the CUI officer at DOI, and she's like, yeah, definitely will help you out with that. I think she said there were like 7,000 CUI references or some really insane number. And like, I have no interest in learning all of those. So them being able to help us out with that and maybe help us identify a process that we can follow in the future, I think is really good. The DOI or the DISC toolkit is another thing I'm pretty excited about, because they're looking at developing a systematic approach to how they bring other offices and bureaus on to Edge and build out these data inventories. And what we've done in the data management program so far is we've been pretty opportunistic. So if we find somebody that's interested and they have a focus, then we work with them but we do it in a pretty informal way. And so I think what this is going to do for us is help us get a little more systematic, have a little better process defined, and be able to replicate it in a way that we're more consistent and makes it easier for folks to understand what's going on and to start spreading that knowledge and experience. So lots of good things for us in that. And then this information mapping workshop. So I think we have a call with the DISC team and the Irwin team on Monday, and we're the first ones going through this. So sometimes it's a little cryptic. And so there's a little blip on the meeting invite that they sent us that said, and we want to start working with the data stewards on 4/16. Does that work? Are the resources available? And we're like, oh, we don't do, like, what do you want to start doing on the 16th? So we'll be figuring that out on Monday and kind of seeing where that goes. So definitely learn as we go. But there's a couple of really cool things with this. So we are ahead of a lot. Well, we're ahead of pretty much everybody except the Office of Natural Resources Revenue in our use of Edge. And the Office of Natural Resources Revenue actually helped kind of build out some of the capabilities for this effort. And they did that because they have a snowflake instance. Right. Wake up.
It's 9:30 call. 9:30 call.
So they have a snowflake instance, and what they are using Edge for, they have a connection from Snowflake to Edge, and they are using that to validate what gets built in Snowflake compared to what they asked the developer to build. So they're using Edge to profile Snowflake to ensure that it's built the way they expect. So that is something we have not done, but the cool thing is that's a JDBC connection. So it's a direct connection from Edge to another database. And then the Department of Interior just finished up a connection process. There's a database they have at the department level. I can't remember what it's called. It starts with a P, but and I am not super familiar with it, but my impression is that it is like where the CPIC reporting information goes in. It's like a portfolio management tool. And so they actually connected that tool to Edge. And one of the things that Todd wants to do is have all of the bureaus and offices managing their data inventories in Edge. And he wants that to be the authoritative data source for this portfolio management database that the CIO is using.
Impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, it's a big vision, right? But to do that, they went through all of the security protocols, set up all the documentation and agreements and all that kind of stuff to have that direct connection. That's a two-way connection. So what I asked them to do is we've gotten DDLs from many of the applications and we've loaded them into Edge. And what Pop Quadrant has told us is that when we're using Edge to do that type of work, DDLs are certainly way better than hand jamming or Excel exports and that kind of stuff. But that a direct connection is how we can use the glossaries and the ontologies and taxonomies that we've built in Edge to let Edge do a lot of the work in profiling the database. So if we can make that direct connection, then Edge can make recommendations that will say, oh, there's like a 60% chance that this column in this table, in this database, matches this glossary entry that you have over here. And so it can start making recommendations about those relationships for us. And so I asked them to use the pilot as maybe an opportunity to help us navigate the security conversation, because we talk about this every once in a while, and we kind of to ourselves, and others will say, I don't know, security will let you do that, right? And so we kind of go, yeah, that probably it hasn't been a lift we've tried to make yet, but I'm hoping that through this we may be able to iron some of that out and establish that path, because that would be really great. The other thing that they're doing is they're developing these Sparkle queries, and so they're going to be writing these queries that will then help us get this information out of Edge. Now, Dawn and Gabriella and others can write queries, but if they're going to do something for us, then it's definitely an opportunity to let them do that. So that's kind of where this is at. I want to stop and see if Brandon or Kara, if you want to add anything. I think it would be good to kind of just share this is a very new process and it's still the very beginning, but I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on where you think things are at or what your experience has been so far.
I personally haven't used Edge.
No, but about the DISC effort.
Kara, do you have anything?
Not really. I mean, I think the process has been non-impactful, right? It hasn't been a huge taxing on our time. She said the meetings that we've had have been really short, just a half-hour quick meeting. We go and we meet with them. They explain their process. We're fairly familiar just because we have been talking and working with you and with the process or hopes for the future for Edges. Erwin already had like the data mapping worksheet, our workbook, all that kind of stuff in Edge. Granted, it hasn't been updated recently, but as far as the things that they were asking for, I suspect that all applications have them kind of dialed in already. And it was a real easy lift for us to give them what they were looking for. And then I think, like you said, we'll see on Tuesday. What the status is, because I don't rightly know, and I think Rochelle's point is really good in that when we're talking about sensitive data and all the research involved on looking for data, what it is and what it isn't, we're in a learning process. Yeah, because we think we know what we know, and like Google with the best of them and try to look and see what's out there and if there's anything we have within our application that's sensitive. I will say some of the work that we're moving towards as far as like working with Viper and IIPA and HEMS and contract information, that might, I'm kind of glad that we're having these conversations before we weigh into that, and that'll help us with our conversations with security and those applications as we move forward, knowing maybe some of this information that we'll gather out of this. But yeah, I would say don't be afraid. It was pretty easy lift, and granted, we had a lot of the work we had already done, so it was really easy for Gabriella to add some of that stuff in, and then quick conversations with us. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think it is. All of the meetings they've scheduled with us are a half an hour. I think we went over a little bit on one of them, but it's been pretty quick. They're pretty structured.
I mean, in part, because it's partially modeling this after what we've done, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's an easy lift because we've done so much work, but I'm curious personally, because this is an agency-wide initiative, right? I mean,
Department-wide.
so what kind of shape are the roads, are other areas then, other than
Yeah, so so the Office of Natural Resources Revenue and Bessie and Bowen, which I can't remember what they stand for, are, and Wildland Fire are the primary users of EDGE right now. Some of the other offices and bureaus have gotten in and kind of played around a little bit, but they don't have a lot of data in there. And so, yeah, that's why this first tab, this import data into EDGE, is a big part. So what they're actually doing with the other pilot projects is sitting down with them, taking whatever they have, whether that's an Excel spreadsheet or, you know, a JSON file or whatever, and they're going to walk that group through importing the data in EDGE and getting things set up, getting their namespaces set up, getting their models set up. They've got ontologists on this contract so that they can help build out those models for the folks, all stuff that Gabrielle and Don are doing for us. But it's a way to get them started so that at the end, this becomes the data inventory system for the Department of Interior.
So Todd's bringing those resources to assist. Okay.
Yeah, so that, see, he has a contract in place.
Got it.
And I think there's like 6 or 8 people on that team, and it's a pretty good sized team.
Cool.
And they've got, it seems like they have the skill sets, they have access to EDGE, so like Gabriella just said, here's the data asset collection in EDGE that this thing you're asking for exists. But for the other bureaus and offices, they're gonna have to like actually import the data.
Right.
So part of it's gonna be teaching them how to use EDGE.
So I'm just curious, what business areas are they looking, or how are they prioritizing the business areas that they're?
So I think, I don't know how the 4 pilot projects got selected, except that we obviously got selected because we're
Awesome.
power users of EDGE.
We're awesome.
Well, that's true.
Well, and it was kind of funny when we were on the first call with them because they're going through this process, right? Like the contractors have they have their slides and they're going through and they're talking about the tool and they're
Sure.
talking about all this stuff. And Lynn Zhang is like frantically messaging me on the side going, please don't be insulted. This is just their regular, you know, I'm like.
We're apologizing.
Yeah, like they were apologizing so much. They just don't know how much you really know. And it's like, it's fine. Like we can always learn something. So it's not a big deal, but it was kind of funny. And so they're trying to balance what they're going to do with us but I'm like, no, I actually want us to go through the process that you're taking everybody else through, because I want to steal that process for us to use. And so it's, you know, will be good for us to walk through it.
There are plenty of use cases in our own, even though we've cleaned up a lot of things, but there's still plenty of use cases that we can do better.
Yeah.
So that's a great point.
Yeah.
Thank you for standing up like that.
Yeah.
To the OCIO. That's awesome.
It's good.
But we did think about polio, and that's what I think the department.
Actually, forget the name of that too. Is it fully? That's probably.
Polio is what the DOI DISC.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah. I don't know. It just was one of those things that.
These and F's are awful close, it's just one little.
They're being clever. Polio.
Well, it could be, you know, PH and. Okay, any questions online? Mr. Buzo, I'm curious, like, if you're getting other communications from the CIO about this effort?
He's not coming off mute, so.
He's not coming off mute, no. Okay.
Excuse me. So is this going to affect, like, say, and if an external user gets on the website and just searches for anything on the DOI website, or is this not connected to any sort of like external websites?
No, that's a really good question. Thank you. So part of this is as we build the data inventories in EDGE, so that the vision for DOI is that the data inventories will be built in EDGE, and then there's a couple of little hops that the data will have to make. But from there, it'll get published in data.gov. So it's the way that we'll be posting metadata out through data.gov. And then also Todd is and Darren both are really like, data's open unless you can show me the policy that says it isn't. And so this, I expect, is going to be available in a variety of places, and it's really intended to help people be able to search for data that we have in the department so that they can access it and use it. Yeah, so the new CDO for the Office of the Secretary is like really starting to hammer us about what getting data out on data.gov. And so we're starting to have some conversations like that. The NIPSI org data is out there like 4 times. So we're trying, there is like absolutely no governance on data.gov. There's like 3 people that manage that whole thing. So we're going to try and clean some of that up, but we want to publish NIPSI.org better.
Yeah, I guess it's related to Edge, but as we build out our data dictionary and ecology and stuff, there seems like a natural home to be inside Edge as well, right? If we can build all of this so that the crosswalks between all of the fire worlds, right, are in one location. What kind of timeline? I mean, because ours is, I'd say the best way I can describe the nearest timeline is stupid aggressive. Yes, it's a technical term. For us to start to get stuff in Edge, to start to build out all of that infrastructure, what does a realistic timeline look like on the DOI side for that collaboration? Should we build something in the interim such that we can share our infrastructure or share all of our definitions and stuff as we go live, and then ultimately work towards getting an Edge maybe a year or 2 from now? That's the one piece I just don't have a good sense of.
Yeah, so the full thing, Todd is, as the CDO, is like really, he gets the interagency and he's really supportive of the use of Edge. So I've talked to him about you guys using it. Rebecca and I talked a little bit about using Edge, and he's like, yep, bring on. So we could get you an account today and you could start using it.
That's what.
Yeah, so I'm also having conversations. I've been talking with Chris Strobel on the Forest Service side. They're wanting to, Chris has said multiple times in this meeting, I don't know if he's on today. He was going to be in and out, but has said multiple times in this meeting and in other conversations that Forest Service's mission really aligns more with DOI than it does with ag. And so he and Ramona really would like to be able to use Edge. So I've talked with Todd about that. Also, Emmy has been having some conversations with the geospatial guy at USDA.
Anthony.
The Chicago.
Ron Cicada.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Enterprise Geospatial.
Yeah. And Ben, Cheryl's husband, can't think of his name right now, is as a librarian at USDA, and he reached out to me. So we have 3 conversations going on with Forest Service about an interest in using Edge. So what Todd has said basically is we've got a set of user licenses. The way the licensing works for Edge is concurrent use, and one license buys you a seat in test, dev, and production. So really 1 license is 3, and they're concurrent use in all 3 environments. And so we have not had it. I think we have 10 licenses right now, which doesn't seem like very much for as many people are in there using it. And Todd's like, we'll just keep going until we start having issues, and then I'll add more licenses. And so we're kind of figuring out the cost structure for people to buy in. But it's pretty, like, the whole thing right now is $200,000 a year. So it's not very expensive relative to all of the capability that we've got to have every module that Top Quadrant has, so we can do pretty much anything. So Todd has said, Forest Service wants in, absolutely. They can start, give them an account, let them start using it. And that was one of our requirements from the very beginning, is we said, Edge has to be positioned that we can get the firefighter from Kansas in, we can, any of our interagency partners need to be able to access it. So that's how the ATO is set up. It's how the security profile is set up. It sits in the GeoPlatform AWS environment, it's all ATO under that,
Right.
so.
To include HR data. So for example, we constantly are asked, how many firefighters do you have? How many permits? How many temps? It doesn't include that kind of data, right?
Not yet.
No.
Eventually.
No, it won't.
This is reference and metadata.
Oh, okay.
So data about the data and drop-down data, domains.
Relationships between what it can do though, and part of what we're gonna be doing with the DISC effort is we want to, there's a way that you can document policies in Edge, and then we could, so part of what we're gonna be doing with DISC is that if we find CUI, like we find something that that is really CUI. So let's say they find something somewhere in somebody else's CUI documentation that says, yes, frequencies are CUI. And then we'll put that reference in Edge, and then we'll link it to the data in Edge so that we can start saying this security posture for this data is because of this specific policy.
Which I think is a really valid point, right? Because like she said, it's been a myth forever. Is it or not? And nobody can find it in writing. And you know, some of these things is birth month day PII. We don't know. Is it really? Is it birth month day year that actually is? And there's all this, the ability to be able to reference that policy and say, this is it. We get that all the time, right? We get those, where does it say that? Where does it say that? And we hear, instead of combing through all of the agency or all the departments, or sorry, all of the bureaus, different policies.
But to go back to this question, so I think her question was more so not about PII, but just a
No,
generic.
it's just.
No, so here's just an example. So that data we wouldn't want to have in Edge, but IDME may be a place that in the future we would be able to consolidate that data and do some of that type of analytic if we had the connections to the appropriate systems. So have a potential path forward, but that's data that we haven't really worked with. So I think in the future maybe, but not right now.
Yeah, to be clear, I wasn't referencing PII within the system. I was saying that we have data elements that we have to explain why we're exchanging them and how we're exchanging
Sure.
them. And having that kind of policy attached to them would be.
Yeah, and I was just trying to address that she's asking at a macro scale, there's a question from Congress, how many people do you have deployed right now?
Yeah.
And so being able to answer that question quickly, okay, is obviously awesome. And so I think to your point though, it's a combination of the IDME and Edge, right? And so the reference data will be identifying what those components are will be in Edge. And then the actual data, to get to your answer, will be in the IDME.
The where to find your data lives in Edge. And then you would go to that system or IDME.
And how your data relates to other data. The business rules for combining that data, that's, we all talk about the fact that, some of us are gonna be retiring and you walk out the door with all of that experience, like Larrabee, we've got to figure out the brain
Wait, he's not retired.
connection
He
thing
doesn't get to retire.
before he retires, so that we can just download before he leaves. But yeah, it's, what we're trying to do is walk through and capture those business rules. So that's part of the fire cause task group, the work that they're doing, is that if they're not just looking at each of those cause definitions and descriptions, but also capturing any relevant business rules for how the data gets created or how the data gets analyzed. And then that will be loaded in Edge so that and again, because it's machine readable, then that starts building out this capability that we can start using technology to do a lot of the work consistently, the same way over and over again, that all of these analysts that sit in all these offices do slightly differently, that then they save something on their desktop. And so just trying to capture all of that. I think other than like the data instances themselves, which we can, especially if we do the direct connection. So that's the other thing about the direct connection is it'll pull a set of sample data, like 20 records or something that will hold just as a sample, so that you can see what the data looks like. But other than the reference data and the metadata, we don't really want to put anything else in Edge.
I have a two-part question. One is, I think that this, we can have the fear of the disc, is motivation to share with Edge. Because then you don't have to be subject to fear, because you're gonna do it through Edge, so it's a plug, and hey, we get your stuff to Edge, it's a good thing. Mentioned the direct connection a couple of times. I mean, do we think security is actually going to allow JDBC direct connections to every application directly without
I don't know.
anything? Because that's a pretty big leap, because it's very more intimately into your system as opposed to sharing data, for instance, through a service.
Yeah,
So it could be, a
We'll see.
lot of times it can go both ways, and anything,
Yeah.
you know, something that can actually make scary thing to the systems and security, but
yeah, I
I
think,
don't deny that if it were allowed, well, then it could, it's the good and the bad. It's like, yeah, you have access to everything. Oh, they have access to everything. You know, so I mean, I can alleviate some of the issues, and frankly, then you can start building dictionaries for people.
Right.
I mean, there's positives that can come from that. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what the reality of that is, because that seems to be one of the.
I,
Say it, but holy cow, they'll never actually allow it.
yeah, I'm definitely not holding my breath on it getting approved, but I figure if we don't make a run at it every once in a while, you know, we're never gonna get a yes, so. And if they can promote it as, you know, this is a departmental effort and it supports departmental activities, maybe that's an additional weight that will make it happen, and, you know, so I'm sure that security will have all kinds of questions and issues, and she'll actually do it, but I would like to see it at least once.
So maybe just talk a little bit about the relationship from IDME to Edge, and maybe that actually helps the security question. Because if we're developing a data lake, okay, that actually brings in all the data from all the applications for archiving, even just for archiving purposes, okay, then it's really a connection to the IDME from Edge. It's not to every application.
Well, no, because, so can you pull up Edge and go in to the Irwin collection, and let's just look at it?
I'm asking.
Because it's more than that, because what we can pull into Edge is the actual
You got
database structure.
Okay,
So that we actually know which column and which table and which database
Sure.
data is contained in.
Okay.
So that is more than, so IBM, so so we can use Edge in a variety of ways, right?
yes,
And one of the ways that we can use it is to understand our data assets from the database level. And that builds the data inventory. It helps us design IDME so that IDME knows where to get the data and what data is authoritative. But we want to govern what data is authoritative through stewardship in Edge.
yes, understood. I get that 100%. And I think that through the Irwin effort, I think that discovery process helped eliminate the mythology of what it actually is authoritative data, right? I mean, they help expose what people believed authoritative data was versus what it actually was.
Right,
so
and I think it has helped us move from the paradigm where it's an application is authoritative to recognizing that an application may actually be only authoritative for one or two data elements, but it has other data that it uses for its business processes. And so Edge allows us to get to that data element
Gotcha.
level in identifying authoritative and upstream and downstream and, you know, that kind of stuff.
So to be clear, I just want to understand it for myself. You're saying Edge can expose fallacies in how we are viewing it as humans, okay, about our own data, about how we use data, how we acquire data, how we move data, how we exploit the data. I was like, because we develop mythology around our data all the time, you know, and so I guess what you're saying is that a system that thinks it's the authoritative data for, you know, 85 elements actually is only 2, and they actually expose elements from other sources and use that to validate or to expose an answer to what that system is trying to do.
Yes, I think it gives us opportunities to have conversations about what is authoritative.
Okay,
So that we can decide as a collective, right? Like that's part of the process that we've practiced for Irwin.
Right.
But we've been very focused on what's being exchanged in that exchange environment. Building out a data inventory of all of our data in all of our applications across the entire enterprise is where we're going to be able to start seeing like all of the places that an instance of data gets used.
nice.
And then we can determine who's authoritative for it and decide, if there's something that we need to do in relationship to that, or if there are other opportunities for them to not have to create something, but still be able to use it, right?
Sure.
But the other thing I think it will do for us as well is that it helps us be able to really clearly understand that just because the same data is getting used in multiple databases doesn't make those databases redundant,
Absolutely.
right? And so getting clarity about why this data, like, incident data can be used in different applications for different reasons. And so it's just going to help us kind of walk through like what is really duplicative versus where is there legitimate reasons for us to let this be separate because
Sure.
of the performance and audience and, that kind of stuff.
So again, like Irwin, we exposed that there was a redundancy in acquisition of the data. Right, it was being pulled, it was being acquired by multiple different systems, and we realized that when you do that, depending on the date, timestamp, and et cetera, it's like the data kind of changes, it shifts,
Right.
and so therefore you have to identify an authoritative chain
Right.
in order to make sure that the data is accurate, depending on the time shift, and
Yeah.
so that's one of the things that was exposed through the Irwin project. Is that we need to identify a change management program around the data itself. And so the only way to do that is to manage the data through its change management process.
Right, and so getting the data lifecycle lined out is Edge can help us do that. So it has, we can have uses data from, provides data to, that whole producer consumer approach, right? So that we can start tracing data through a whole bunch of systems related to policy, related to standards, all that kind of stuff. That's part of
That's
it.
awesome.
Amy pulled up but I think that's the inventory part. You wanted the data dictionary.
Yeah, I want
Part-
the data asset collection that shows the database table structures.
Okay,
Okay, that.
I got it.
Relinquish control.
I won't.
All right.
So you want to describe that, Don?
So yeah, so we've brought in, so this is the Irwin data schema. We have each of the fields within the tables. And so within each of the assets over here, we have properties that are defined, the precision, scale. Let's find a string. Those are all going to be description. Yeah, so varchar, database column, the name, but we also have properties that were not filled out from the DDL. So there are options, data quality status. There is supersedes and superseded by. So if over time there was a database change, a schema change, and this was the column we were using, now it's this one. This is where you would map that. Criticality, critical, and this particular data model is something that existed already. And we've just extended it as needed to capture any of our additional data we may need.
So this part right here, this data protection properties, this is something that we'll be using with DISC, right? Because this is where we're going to identify if there's sensitive data, PII, all of that. And that's the cool part, right? Because then we know where it's at and understand what it is. So lots of opportunity, right? And I think that as we go into the next conversation, that's part of what we want to understand from the community, like what is really important for us to know about our applications in our inventory? Like what questions do we have to do data calls on and answer on a regular basis? Because if we could start managing it here, then it's available for all of us to understand on an interagency basis and even be able to answer calls within individual bureaus or offices as well.
Chris Strobel had his hand up. I don't know if he.
Yeah, Chris.
Oh, I was just curious while you were sharing that, what tag or field you were using to denote authoritativeness. It's not a critical question to answer. I'm sure there's a property in there for that, but once those have been tagged to the earlier point, then you could presumably say, show me all the elements that are authoritative, and it'll go search through everything and give you a list of columns and where those columns are. There's my authoritative stack, as opposed to the laundry list of a gazillion attributes that are some are authoritative, some aren't.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And the cool thing about Edge is that if there's like the way that those ontologies are designed to function is allows us to represent our business the way we talk about our business. And so Gabriella took some of the out of the box models that Edge came with and modified them to put our language on them so that it's easier for our user community to use. So if there's not anything in there that says authoritative, in that clear text that we want, we'll just add it. We don't have to go back to a developer. We don't have to wait on anybody. We can just do it ourselves. And that's it just puts a lot of power in our hands and we can move really, really fast with stuff.
Good question, Roshelle.
Yeah.
You might have covered it. Do you get a sense of as to what DOI wants to do once they identify sensitive data, what they want to do with the data?
Is there more to it than, this is good in and of itself, but it's taught some things in mind? Like,
Well, I think so the zero trust issue, like being able to really clearly say, here's where we have sensitive data. So that's a big part of it, right? And so I'm not sure exactly where that's going to go. And he probably has some things in mind that he may not have shared with the data governance board. And in all honesty, I missed the first data governance board where they brought this out. I got on the next one. They were like, yeah, Irwin and Fire is going to do this. And it's like, we're going to do what?
You missed the meeting. Got it.
I missed a meeting and look what happened. So yeah, so he may have addressed that at that point in time. He and I've got a one-on-one next week and I'll chat with him about that and see where that's going to go. But yeah, I mean, I think he has some big plans for stuff and just wants to start kind of tying things together. This is really to establish a pattern using the sensitive data, but then once we've kind of got that process, the requirement's going to come around to say all of your data. And so I know that's part of the direction that he's heading. And that meets the requirement because the Secretary of Interior is responsible to OMB for developing a data inventory for all of the assets of DOI.
I'm just concerned because the bureaus have their own authorities around some of the data. So we just need to be very clear about what they're doing with that data. So I'm going to reach out to that group.
Yeah, it's, and Todd's well aware of that. And so, and that's probably how, I don't know that, I can't remember the other three titles off the top of my head, but that probably was part of making sure they walked through some of that.
Well, and I think also all of this makes it machine readable. That helps us just as we go into that AI discussion, whatever large language model or whatever, that can help us protect whatever.
Yeah, but at the same time, you're exposing that data potentially too. There's some data that I don't want people to know where it's at. So if if through the process you identify it, then what do we do at that point, right? So.
Yeah, I can see most of our data is open. And so it's not as much an issue here, but you start getting.
My other job.
Yeah, he's thinking about the rest of his portfolio.
Yeah, and that's it, and that, they have to do, I don't know how they're gonna do that. Okay, so, Yesterday, Amanda had mentioned that she'd like us to talk more about Edge. And so there's a couple of things that we can show you, and we can do that now, or we can like fit it in someplace else if we need to break in conversation. So there's two things that I think are kind of interesting that we're doing. One is we've worked with the NWCG training modernization, their training modernization effort, right? So what they, when we started talking to them a couple of years ago, Annie and Mike and others were going through incident positions and trying to capture tasks for each incident position in an Excel spreadsheet. And then they were trying to figure out how to match them up to see if they were similar statements or different statements. And Gabrielle and I were like, oh, don't do that. Let's get this in Etch. And so we've worked with them. They brought on a detailer. JD was on for, I think, 120 days and worked with Gabriella and really built out 2 or 3 of the incident positions in Edge. And so all of those tasks are in there as individual reusable elements. And the cool thing about that is then we can go in and say, how many positions do this task? And you can see, oh, there's 30 positions that do this task. And so if we make a change to this task, we know all of the positions that are impacted. We know all of the training that's impacted, like, right, it starts tying that stuff together. But we kind of got ourselves in a bit of a bind because as they were building this contract for the work that they have going on now, they said, well, can we produce the incident position description itself, the document from Edge? And we're like, maybe not in Edge, maybe IDME. And so we were like having these conversations, kind of like, you know, I apparently missed a important element that they had some urgency with it. And so they actually wrote it into the contract that we would produce that. And then Don and I are looking at each other going, okay, let's figure out what we're going to do with that. So Don wrote a Python script that is amazing and is able to generate the incident position description in the NWCG format exactly the way it looks. They want it to look when it gets printed or published. And so, so we can show you that. And then the other thing that Chuck has been doing some really cool work and has some ideas about how to use Edge and to support some of that, so we can have some of those conversations too if we want. So I don't know if we want to stick with the agenda and move into the portfolio stuff, or if you want to take a look at some of those, Shannon.
I was just curious about, so for the positions, is that information being populated from the 310-1 or where, I mean, how is that information being updated when it's changed?
So the position, so we start kind of like with the position naming board. So they manage the position names and codes in Edge. And then 310-1 is in here. So we have a couple of versions of 310-1. And then we have the tasks that are associated with those incident positions. And so we haven't got all of those links made yet, but the goal is that as these incident positions get built out in Edge, that we're making more of those links, and that we can, one of the things that we've already played around with a little bit with 310-1 is that if we manage it in Edge, which the stewardship committee is not doing that yet, we're kind of doing it, you know, when they put out the new 310, then we bring it in because it's valuable for us in the way that we connect the data. But then you can start going, you can do comparisons. So the more the years that we have in here, then you can start going, oh, what was 310 5 years ago? And you can easily go back and reference it instead of having to pull it out and like, try and map it yourself. So 310-1 is definitely part of the data set that we have in here. And we're working.
So I'm just trying to think of how that plays into IQCS, obviously, and the qualifications for, you know, so if somehow that information was being updated, which could potentially update to IQCS, because I think now when stuff changes, you know, Marley and others have to go in and change it based upon whatever the 310-1 is. So it's just interesting. It's funny to see how potentially how things can all connect, right?
Yeah, yeah, and the goal with this then is that is then 310-1 becomes reference data, right? That's managed by steward in the system, and that via API, whoever needs that data can connect to it. And when a change is made, that is immediately available, and we don't have to do emails and all of that kind of stuff to try and let people know when stuff is updated. The other thing, some of the conversation we were having yesterday about, is a position active? Is it active only for DOI? Like all of those types of attributes, we can document in Edge, and then it's machine readable, and then any application that needs that has all the parts and pieces to figure that out. So it's getting that metadata associated with those positions appropriately, then makes it a lot easier. And so any changes that get made in one place, and everybody that needs them has them, right? That's really what we're trying to get to. Okay. All right. So, you guys want to see what Don made?
Do it.
Okay.
What'd you make, Don?
What'd you do, Don?
Yeah. All right, so we were doing a GraphQL statement, so Edge natively has a GraphQL endpoint. Anything that you're seeing over here in the search, that can be displayed as a GraphQL query. So we created one that would pull the data for, we started off with Crew Boss. That was one of the few positions that had been done. And in the code, just iterated through seeing, okay, which of these statements does Crew Boss exist in? And did it for just that single position. As we were showing it to them, they're like, oh, that's great. Can we get it? We've also been working on this one and these other two. Can we maybe see what that looks like? And so on the call, we were actually able to back it out, remove the filter, and iterate through and create the documents for all of the positions. Now, most of them have not been done. The data has not been associated with the other positions, but we were able to create, and the documents aren't completely done. I had not, I am no Python coder. I just got the basics in there, and then I was able to just right click and refresh the table of contents and do some of the minor formatting, page number type things. But the entire document has the headers that they were wanting. I also included the statuses on the individual statements, just so that they could compare and see, were they getting what they thought they put in? Since a Word document is more what they were used to seeing the data in versus each individual statement within Edge. No, it wasn't anything from the workflow. It was anything that had been committed, but the pending new was however they were coding statuses in their work.
That's from their side, not our side.
Correct.
They're good to do that. The cool thing about that is he ran 130 incident positions, something about that. So like
109.
109. So not all of them are populated, right? So a lot of them are just empty shells, the template. 2 minutes to produce all of them. So it's, when you think about it from a workflow perspective, like instead of somebody having to manage that in a Word document, then transform it into a PDF and then put it on a website, right? Like we're speeding up that process. And with the new Drupal connection, the new Drupal website for NWCG, it is connected to Edge. So the glossary that will be that's visible on the NWCG website is from Edge. So it's like we're starting to make those connections, And I just think it's super exciting because we're gonna start seeing things and doing things that we just couldn't imagine 5 years ago, so.
That's speed and the agility of being able to do that is huge. And I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody that participated in dispatch class rewriting and getting all of the materials and the task books and the yada, yada, yadas updated and pulled together. I mean, hours. I'm sure you put hours in on that rewrite, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this is that, it's been a challenge where if a task changes, right? Like, okay, what other positions use that task? And then you got to go find each of those and make those changes, right? This is, if a change is made to a task, an addition, whatever, you can see all of these. Does it affect all of these use this task? Does it affect all of them? Yes, push the button and print out the new ones and you're good to go. Done. So
That must save so much time. You have to open up each document,
And find where
Find
a
where it is.
similar statement may
Yeah.
be.
probably wasn't the same statement, so you'd have to film.
yeah, it's pretty amazing when you think about it from a workflow perspective and work management perspective. So the one thing that we are concerned about is that right now, Dawn is the button. So if anybody wants it, they have to hit him up for it. So we reached out to Microsoft and said, hey, here's where we're at. Can you help us with it? So we're going to give them the Python script and access to Edge, and they're going to see if they can help us figure out like a nice little user interface so that whether it's the NWCG staff, we'll probably,
You're just showing off.
probably
Yeah.
start.
Because, like I said, I am not a Python coder. That was all going back and forth with ChatGPT.
It's like beyond
You should have seen like that, like if you haven't used ChatGPT or anything like that, I mean, like watching what he was doing was so incredible because he would go in and say, okay, I want to do this. And then ChatGPT would give him something back and he'd go, well, I needed to do that. And then it was just iterating on it, right? And so then he had to start naming them so that he could say, can you compare version 3 to version 5? And ChatGPT is so polite. It's like, thank you, please. It's like all these manners but it was amazing to watch him iterate through that with ChatGPT helping him build out that code and documenting all of it. So all of it's
Inline documentation the whole way. It's beautiful.
Yeah. So cool.
We were talking about similar statements. So in here, this is the statement that's tied to the book, but here are all the other similar statements that got logged based on that. So you have kind of that whole lineage.
So I have to tell you, one of my favorite quotes was JD after he'd been on the details. So, he's the firefighter, so he could say this, but I always have to say that, caveat that with. So as he was getting ready to finish his detail, he told Gabriella, he said, Edge is so easy, even a firefighter can use it.
Down on that ChatGPT, are you using ChatGPT directly or are you using a tool that uses it like as an engine? There's products out there.
There are, that was just directly.
No, it's directly.
Okay.
At some point, look at a tool. I'm sort of, yeah.
All right, so we'll check in queue and maybe pop into that, talk some of the fire environment stuff at another point. And hand it over to Chris and Emmy to talk about portfolio.